Thanks, Trace. It's good to be back, and I'm just going to do a very quick recap about something I said last week. Bring you a couple of new points, which will then launch us into some breakout time to discuss with each other, maybe discuss with God and hear back. From God ourselves. So I'm going to take you back, and the start of lockdown and everything came to an abrupt stop. There was no school and no work for a lot of people, and there was no church gathering, and we were able to sort of very quickly to convert to Zoom church, which was great. And I remember sending out a message on our Connect group to say that God was not restricted by lockdown, and that he still had free movement, and he was still able to meet with us even though we were not able to meet together. So there was a phrase that Matt taught us. He said, stop, rest. So in that rest was Matthew chapter 11, verse 27. Come to me, Jesus says. Come to me, and I will give you rest. And I spent some time reflecting on that. I used the Living Bible, and God gave me this phrase about following his timetable. Following his timetable. And for you parents out there, you were plunged into this home schooling, and that was what he did. He wanted to home school me. He was my dad, and as his daughter, he wanted to home school me. So we had stop, and we had, and thirdly, at the start of lockdown, I'm sure that I felt that it was pressing a button at the end of lockdown and things would be reset. There would be this new normal. But actually what I found was that it's already been, and I think it's only the start, but it's already been quite a painful process. And I likened it to maybe breaking your arm. And when you break your arm, you have to get the break reset. And it often means being put in a plaster cast, and for it to be immobilized, that you have to adapt and adjust to different ways of living and working. So having stopped and having had a little bit of time to rest in God, then there was this fairly painful process of how do we reset. And the start of the year, our vision for the church, remembering that the church are the people, church is not the building. So our vision for the church, for the people of King's Community Church, was grow. Our 2020 vision was that the people would grow. And I prayed out this prayer. I'm not surprised that you know, when you pray these prayers and then God speaks back to you. But I said to God, nudge me, hug me. And the main focus last week was in Isaiah even 54. And we had that nudge in verse 2. And we also had the hug in verse 10. And if they're easier phrases for you, there was a challenge in verse 2, and there was comfort from verse 10. And the title of the talk was Spread Out, Think Big. So my first question is, have you been thinking big this week? And hopefully there will be time for some breakouts. Have you been thinking big this week? Enlarge the place of your tent. Go out to the sides. This idea of extending ourselves, of stretching ourselves, maybe outside of our comfort zone, of adapting, of being flexible, being versatile. So last week was Pentecost Sunday, and in that sense, sort of the birth of the New Testament church. The church in Acts, the church was modelled on Jesus, which is an excellent way. It should always be. You know, we should look to Jesus to see how he did it. What did Jesus do? And Jesus' ministry took place mostly outside of the church building. I couldn't think of too many sort of stories that were inside of a church building. So one particularly came to mind, the woman at the well. So this woman went to the well at a different time from all of the other women, and Jesus knew that. And he particularly went at that time to meet that woman where she was at with her particular need. There are other examples. Zacchaeus up a tree. That's not particularly sort of health and safety minded these days, but Jesus met Zacchaeus up a tree. So Jesus' ministry was integrated in the community. It was not segregated within the four walls of the church. It wasn't a ministry behind closed doors. So I've heard this phrase said, and I'm sure I've heard it at church, that the Holy Spirit is in me for me, and it's on me for the world. So the Holy Spirit will come and minister to me and meet my needs. But the Holy Spirit is also on me to meet the needs of others, to work through me, to benefit those around me, not just to benefit me, to benefit those around me. So this last weekend and again yesterday, I've been listening to a man, his name is Paul McConaughey, originally based in Sheffield, but now I think he's out in America, linked with the Grace Gathering. And I'm just going to give you a phrase that what he said was, don't get spiritually fat or grow spiritually faint. Get spiritually fit. So I'll just repeat that. Don't get spiritually fat or grow spiritually faint. Get spiritually fit. Now, I'm just going to use a sort of a physical example, and one that's fairly local to us. So who knows the buffet restaurant, which is now called Safari? Give me a little wave. Down the Wolverhampton Road, yeah, was it called Wingwar before? And some people might know it as the Hen and Chickens. Okay, so this buffet restaurant, and you go along, and there is this massive food, okay, and food from all around the world. And you've got starters, and you've got mains, and you've got side dishes, and then at the back there's all those desserts. So you are overwhelmed with all of this food, and it's great, it's really nice to go for a treat, but it's very easy to overindulge and to overeat. So let's just think of the exact opposite of that, of going on a diet and restricting what calorie intake. And sometimes when people go on a diet, they suddenly will join a gym and do lots of exercise, so less calories in and trying to burn calories off. And sometimes that makes you feel weak, a little bit faint. So using that sort of physical example, you need a healthy balance. You need to eat healthily, not too much sugar, not too much fat, and a reasonable amount of exercise. So, you know, one of the things during lockdown was being able to go out for a walk each day. So along those lines, we're just going to move it into the spiritual realm, and thinking about that Acts church and how they met together, how they gathered together, and that was in the temple. And sometimes there were a lot of rituals. And so what this guy Paul was trying to say is that if you have too much temple, too much gathering together, too many rituals, you could get spiritually fat. If you're receiving all the time, consuming all the time. But then he said, if you're serving and ministering in giving out too much mission, that's not good either. That there is this healthy balance of being nourished, that we meet together to be nourished, to be fed, to be able to go out and to give, to be spiritually fit. Now, I do remember back in January being in your kitchen, Trace, and sitting at the breakfast bar, and Matthew was there, there were the three of us. And we sat there and we were talking about this 2020 vision about grow. We came out with this half-time team talk. Perhaps took Matt a bit by surprise, because I am not into football at all. And this certainly was not of me. It was a God moment. And it was about how a team rests and has refreshment and instruction between the two halves of the game. And the God was pointing out that our gatherings on a Sunday are like this half-time team talk, that actually it's not the main event. And that's quite a hard concept perhaps to get your head round. It was a hard concept for me to get my head round, and what did it mean, and how do we move forward? And I think that's where we're at. These are the big questions that we now need to ask and to discuss. I've just got one last point, and just want you to imagine that God is going to call a heavenly press conference. It might be at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and we're all going to put our TVs on and watch this heavenly press conference. And I'd like to suggest that there would be 3 lecterns. Okay, we've all, you can picture this, I hope, in your mind. There will be 3 lecterns, and there will be God the Father, there will be God the Son, and there will be God the Holy Spirit. And they're all telling us the same thing. They're all encouraging us the same thing. And this is what we're being encouraged to do. Go. Save lives. Populate heaven. God the Father is telling us to go. To save lives and populate heaven. So in Mark 16, verse 15, if you want to look up this reference, Jesus says, go into all the world and preach to all creation. If you read further in the passage, it says the disciples went out and the Lord worked with them. Back to you, Trace.
Trace, do you want to join me? A meeting? Yeah, thank you, Heidi. Great reflections. And as we said, we wanted to give some time now to give you chance in breakout rooms to have a think about this, to talk together about how you respond to what we've been hearing. But I thought it'd be good just to, I don't know about you, Trace, how do you respond? When you think about the idea of stopping and resting and this season of lockdown, what changes have you noticed? What things have you noticed that have become more of a priority? Or how do you think about the things that you're involved with? And does anything need to change? Or has things already been changing? Or, in terms of the ghosts, save lives, populate heaven, how do you respond to that?
Well, it's a big question, isn't it, Matt? It's a really big question. And I found myself just this morning thinking about, at our gathering this morning, running through Heidi's talk from last week and just trying to actually pinpoint what is God saying in our lives. And I think some of this pictorial language of lifting the curtains to the tent is really inspiring. And for many of us, it's going to mean lots of different things. And there are challenges for our personal lives, there are challenges for our work lives, the different communities that we find ourselves in. And I was just reflecting this morning that I have this reoccurring dream. I'm often dreaming this one dream, and it's in different locations, but the theme of the dream is that the place in which I am living is bigger than I realize that it is. So I'm often in a house and I open a door and I discover that there is a room in my house that I did not know was there. And I often have this dream, and I do believe that God is trying to say something through that, and I'm not 100% sure what that is, but it's really in line with what we are talking about. How do we grow? How do we expand our tents? How do we lift those curtains and go, save lives, populate heaven? I think there are huge challenges for all of us. Yeah. So where do we go from here, Matt?
Yeah, I know. Certainly when I think about my responses to when I think about a tent, and we've been known to camp a few times.
Oh yes.
And, certainly if it's a rainy day like it is today and others want to join you in the tent, obviously before social distancing, you often have to move things out of the way. And I know me and you have talked, Trace, about some of what's been happening in lockdown has been like a moving some things out the way.
Yeah.
Suddenly like you go, you know what, I really want to, we're locked in with our families if we live with other people, but that suddenly becomes a new priority, like a new thing to savor, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've found that I haven't wanted to let go of that at all. That actually sometimes things that take me out the house I'm like, well, actually, I'm really enjoying just being with the people that I love.
Yeah.
I appreciate that's not the situation for everybody. We're all living in different environments, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true. Very, very different for all of us. But there is sometimes a something about, for some of us, maybe to go, well, look, I'm just so busy. How can I do the populating heaven? That sounds so scary or so big. But maybe for some of us, it's about, oh, what things do I need to move out the way? What things are good, but aren't making room, making space for connecting with other people? I think about my street and the neighbours, and how do I connect with them? What could I do to just know their names, you know, see their faces? And I'm rubbish with names, but how can I just move things out the way? And some of that is the rushing in and out, too many jobs to do, too many church meetings, and maybe there needs to be some less of that to make room. Heidi, any reflections from yourself? I know are you still unmuted? How
Yeah,
do you respond personally? And then we're going to send everyone to breakout rooms.
yeah. One of the things already is that we on Thursday didn't go outside to clap, and
No.
I was thinking, you don't want to lose that connection with
Yeah.
the community, as you say, going
Absolutely.
out, because it wasn't just to go out and clap and to say thank you to all our key workers, but it was to talk to the neighbour next door and to shout across the road, is everybody okay? And is everybody doing okay? Are you still working from home? Oh, I saw you had a Sainsbury's delivery. So we already need to be careful not to lose those good things that we put in place. So yeah, there's an awful lot to think about and to consider.
Indeed, indeed. So it's going to be over to you guys now. I'm going to send you to break rooms, and like we said, they're going to be slightly bigger. I think there's at least 5 people in each room. So I know for some people you're on little screens, and so you can't often see the notice that I post into the groups. So here's something, if you're going to write down, you might have already formulated a question that you want to be asking each other. But if God, here's the question that I've posted here. Or there's a few questions actually, you can pick any of them. What is God resetting in your life? Another question could be, what are the tent sides? You know, if we're going to enlarge a tent, or like Tracy said, this extra room in the house. If you were to think about or to dream about expanding into what? Into where? Where is the Lord opening up for you? Maybe that's a question for you to think about in your life. Where would you dream to open up into? Is it in your family? Is it in your street? Is it amongst other friendship groups? Where could you go? As Heidi said, perhaps that's another way of asking it. Where could you go? And we use the language, don't we, of walking with Jesus, transformed. Where could you go to be a part of something? Maybe that's your workplace, maybe that's your street, your friendship groups, your family. They're things to think about.